It's a great pleasure to have you all. My name is Chase Robinson. I'm the president of the Graduate Center. It is a great pleasure to welcome you tonight as we launch an important new series of conversations called Black Women in the Public Sphere. Our co-host for the series is the Institute for Research on the African Diaspora in the Americas and the Caribbean. I should say that it's one of our 30 institutes and centers, all of which, in one way or another, advance our public mission. And among the reasons that public programming is flourishing here is precisely because they are so active and so successful. Public institutions like the Graduate Center play a special role, and this is especially important these days, in fostering reasoned and open discussion. As a community of some 6,000 students, scholars, and researchers, the Graduate Center is one of the largest PhD granting institutions in the country. As some of you will know, we are home of pioneering research and creative work, of Nobel, Guggenheim, and Pulitzer Prize winners. We are proud to rank among the country's top 10 institutions in awarding doctorates to students from underrepresented minority groups. Tonight's focus on Black women in higher education was sparked most immediately by the 2016 presidential election and also by the more recent Senate race in Alabama, which publicly highlighted the potent force that African American women exert on US politics, culture, and society, themes that this series will return to. We are delighted that Valerie Smith, the president of Swarthmore College, is with us tonight to open this series. We were looking forward to having another guest on the stage, Carol Mason, the president of John Jay College of Criminal Justice here in CUNY, but regrettably, she's been unable to attend due to a family emergency. We wish her and her family well. Nonetheless, you are in for a treat, and the treat is an in-depth conversation. I am really, really pleased to introduce Valerie Smith, the president of Swarthmore College. Dr. Smith became the 15th president of Swarthmore in 2015. She is a celebrated scholar of African American literature and culture. Before coming to Swarthmore, she served as founding director of the Center for African American Studies and dean of the college at Princeton University. She's published widely on African American literature, culture, and the arts. You can get a glimpse of the breadth of her interests from her most recent works, one on Toni Morrison and another on race and real estate. Leading the conversation tonight is distinguished Professor Robert Reid-Pharr, a prominent scholar of African American intellectual and cultural history. Robert is also the director of the Institute for Research on the African Diaspora. In 2016, he was named a Guggenheim Fellow in the field of literary criticism in support of the scholarship that appeared in his most recent book, Archives of Flesh, African America, Spain, and Post-Humanist Critique. Thank you for joining us tonight for what promises to be a thoughtful and thought-provoking discussion. Robert.
Thank you. Can you hear us?
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much, Chase, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm expecting that we're going to have a wonderful conversation. So Valerie, I think I should probably go ahead and get my my geekiness out of the way and say that I think that I speak for everyone in this room when I say that the fact that you've become the president of Swarthmore College means a great deal to people, to African American people, to women, and many of us have followed your career marvelously. So I just want to say that I appreciate the path that you've taken and the path that you're on.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I wanted to also talk about the fact that you are, in fact, a New York native. Where are you from?
I'm from Brooklyn. I like to say, yes, I like to say that I grew up in Williamsburg before it was famous, before it was sort of hip, but it was always cool. It's
Right.
great. But it was a wonderful place to grow up. And so I grew up there, and when I went off to college, my parents moved out to Long Island, something for which I have not yet
Right.
forgiven them.
That can be
But,
forgiven.
Yes.
And so both of your parents are educators.
Yes. My father is a retired biology professor. He spent his career at the Brooklyn Center of Long Island University. And my mother is a retired elementary school teacher from Brooklyn as well.
So one of the things I just, while we're doing a little bit of background with you, I wanted to know whether or not the career that you decided to take as an educator was something that you decided as a very young person. Did you know that when you were entering college and going on to graduate school, or is it something that was, like for a lot of us, more happenstance?
I think it was much more happenstance for me, to tell you the truth. I loved being an English major, and I wasn't sure what to do with it, so I decided to go to graduate school, and I discovered in graduate school that I loved teaching, and I actually realized how rewarding it was for me to be able to pursue research in African American literature. And so I found myself almost by accident or serendipitously on this academic path. And one of the sort of strangest moments, I would say, of that phase of my life took place one afternoon when I was at my parents' house. I was in the final stages of my dissertation, and it all of a sudden hit me that I was following in my father's footsteps. I mean, it took me that long to realize what I was doing. But you know, I like to say that it's in the sort of in the family DNA in a way, the sort of love of education. So it's not surprising, but I wasn't consciously following in their path.
So Bates College, and then you go to get a PhD at the University of Virginia.
Right.
And then your first job is at Princeton.
Right.
And you began there as an assistant professor at Princeton. You were there for, I don't know how many years you were there.
So I began as an instructor, and I finished my dissertation, and then I was there 9 years, I think. So I think it was 9 years in that go-round. And shortly after I got tenure, I left to go to UCLA.
As one does.
Right. But I think that the part of me that loved living in a city.
And you're saying Los Angeles was not a city?
No, I'm saying that's what drew me to Los Angeles. Right.
Got it.
Is that I just, the opportunity to be at a large public institution in a city was enormously appealing to me. And UCLA was appealing at that moment in particular because the university had made a significant investment in diversifying the faculty, and some of the largest departments, and English was one of them. And I just thought it would be really exciting to be in a department with multiple scholars in every area of U.S. ethnic literature and in African diaspora literatures. And I also had the opportunity to work with some extraordinary graduate students then.
So one of the things that you and I share is that we both have strong roots in early African American literature. Can you talk about your development as an intellectual, how you chose your topics, what were most interesting to you?
Sure. So my first book sort of looked at the relationship between constructions of literacy and freedom in antebellum narratives, slave narratives, and sort of then tried to tease out the ways in which those connections became rearticulated in 20th century African American literature. And in that book, I think I was really sort of excited about the opportunity to explore the relationship between sort of history, ideological changes, and narrative form. I mean, I think that sort of relationship between aesthetics and constructions of history has always intrigued me. But as I was finishing that project, I had the opportunity to curate an exhibit of films by African American women at the Whitney. And you ask yourself, what's the connection between these two projects? And there was not an obvious connection between these two projects. But this is a theme that I think I would like to actually begin to tease out in our conversation. I got a phone call and somebody said, you know, I understand that you love film and you're interested in feminism, and we'd like to have somebody curate this program. And I thought, I'm not sure I know anything about that, but then I thought, how can I say no? And so I was fortunate to have been able to meet a number of African-American filmmakers and video artists in the area, in the sort of tri-state area and beyond. They were excited that somebody was interested in learning more about their work and exhibiting it at a major museum. And that sort of freed me up to be able to do more work in visual studies and visual culture. And it actually also helped hone and refine my interest in feminist studies. And so the next book that I wrote was really looking at the issue of intersectionality and the way, or the sort of the hermeneutic, I suppose, of intersectionality and how it helps us understand contemporary culture, visual culture, literary studies, and so on. So that book, I felt in a way, sort of freed me up, to be more of a cultural critic. And then after that, I did a number of editorial projects, some literary history, some in film and media studies. And then my third monograph was the one that Chase mentioned. It was on Toni Morrison, a writer whose work I have loved a long time and about whom I had written in some of my earlier projects. So it was wonderful to be able to luxuriate in her writing, nonfiction, the fiction, the children's writing, and again, to go back to thinking about the relationship in her work between aesthetic forms and the problematics of history and historical relationships as they articulate themselves in Black lives. And then I've actually also always had this fascination about the question of race and property. And been thinking about everything from the way Black bodies were trafficked as objects in the antebellum period, to thinking about redlining and gentrification, and a whole host of issues. And so related to that, something that I was beginning to write about, to teach more in my own courses. And then I had the opportunity at Princeton to organize a wonderfully interdisciplinary conference that brought together sociologists, historians, architects, literary scholars, attorneys, legal theorists, and we had a marvelous sort of day and a half of thinking about issues of race and property from all these different perspectives. And then my last book project came out of that conversation.
While you were speaking, I realized that just recently, Lyle Ashton Harris has published a new collection of what's called his Ectogram collection, and a lot of the images of it are taken from the Black Popular Culture Conference in which you participated. And so there's an amazing image of you, Henry Louis Gates, Cornel West, maybe Stuart Hall. And I wonder if you want to say anything about the development of that class of African-American intellectuals. So many of you have gone on to be such prominent people in this country and in this country. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? Did you know that you were on that path when you were at that conference? Did you know that it was as significant as it was? It's particularly important for us here because the person who did that conference was Michelle Wallace, who was on this faculty until she retired this year, as a matter of fact. Right.
I think, so I'm going to answer that question indirectly. About a month or so ago, I was at a conference or a panel at Columbia where we were celebrating, I think it might have been the 20th anniversary of the first edition of the Norton Anthology of African American Literature. And what was wonderful about that was that it was an opportunity for those of us on the panel, so included Farrah Griffin, and Farrah hosted and moderated the discussion, but Elizabeth Alexander, Bob O'Meally, Skip Gates, a couple of other people. And what kept coming up in the conversation was this feeling of gratitude that we had, that we had come of age in this profession at a time when we were, in a way, sort of shaping our field collectively, that we that we were reading each other's work, learning from each other's work, sharing students, mentoring each other's students, but that there were really profound, loving relationships that connected us as we moved through our careers. And our careers have taken a variety of different paths, but I think we did support each other as our interests expanded, right? So one of the things, I remember Bob O'Meally thanked Skip for the way in which his role in the Norton freed him up to write about Black vernacular culture and music in a way that he had not done before. So there was a way in which we were sort of taking these opportunities as they presented themselves and giving ourselves and each other permission to sort of stretch out and expand the contours of the field. And I think there's something, I don't know that at the time we were aware that that was what was happening, but I think we were grateful for the friendships and the colleagueships. And I think now, as we look back on those years, I think we all feel a sense of humility and delight that we've had this extraordinary journey together.
You were also, I believe, the founding director of the Center for African American Studies at Princeton. Do I have that right? Do I have the name right?
Yeah.
Good golly, why would you do something so difficult?
Okay, so it's another theme, another thread, is I generally don't know how difficult things are when I say yes. So, I mean, it was not as difficult as it might have sounded. I had been chair of African American Studies at Princeton at Yale. Try it again. At UCLA. What school am I at? Okay. At UCLA for a number of years at a time when the university was interested in expanding it. And what I realized that I was pretty good at was spending the institution's money. And
I would be good at that here if we had more money to spend.
I know. So I'm actually pretty good at finding that moment, that sweet spot when the institution has money and jumping in there. But so UCLA was interested in expanding African American studies, and I enjoyed the opportunity to work with chairs across a range of social science departments in particular, to help recruit some new faculty and to expand that at the time it was a program, now it's a department. So I knew that it would be a lot of work, but I also felt that it was an important moment at Princeton to be able to seize the opportunity to attract more colleagues to the university. We were given the opportunity to have a new building. I mean, the building required a gut renovation, and so I awakened. So I sort of came to the odd awakening that it was actually my responsibility to oversee every sort of component of that renovation. Not quite what I thought I was going to be doing, but it turned out to be a lot of fun. And then doing fundraising, actually was more fun than I expected as well. So it was, I certainly can't say that I did not have sleepless nights worrying about how a search was going to go and managing some of the sensitivities around building a unit. But I'm really delighted that I was able to do it. And so, and as you know now, it's a department.
Right.
So it has grown from a center to a department. And my colleagues have done a magnificent job, I think, of really raising the profile even more. So I'm really thrilled about that.
Valerie, I have to say that part of the reason I ask you that question, it's a little bit of a trick in that I'm assuming that the experience that you gained from doing that job led directly to your becoming the dean at Princeton. Am I right about that?
I think that's right, yeah.
I think that the secret question that, the secret question that everybody in this room, well, I want to know, is what would make a person of your stature wildly succeeding in her career decide to leave her job as a member of the faculty, not leave her job, but to change her job drastically as a member of the faculty at Princeton in order to become an administrator? Like, what was the motivation for that, And maybe what were the steps that you took in order to move from one position to the other?
Well, I can describe a couple of things I think that happened. One is that I realized that by agreeing to both chair African American Studies at UCLA and then to continue to do it at Princeton, I was already sort of moving into the administrative path. I mean, I was still able to teach, I was able to find time to write, but I was certainly aware of the fact that I was making some trade-offs. But I actually felt that the work was important. I felt that in some ways it was a reflection of my intellectual interests. I knew that I was helping to invest in the future of the institution and invest in future generations of students. That was incredibly important to me. And I was somebody who believed in the value of building an increasingly diverse faculty, both in terms of demographics and in terms of intellectual interests. And I guess I felt that to the extent that that was an important value for me, that if I had the opportunity to help make that happen, I should go ahead and do that. So that was sort of one thing. As far as moving into the dean's role is concerned, and I did that work and I enjoyed many aspects of it, so that was an important thing. But as far as the dean's role is concerned, I felt that I did that somewhat reluctantly. While I was heading African American Studies, I would get inquiries from executive search firms saying that I'd been nominated for this deanship or that deanship, and so on. And so at first I thought it was funny, because I couldn't imagine myself in those roles. And then, and then I just ignored them. And then one day I happened to meet someone who had worked for one of those firms. And I said, I keep getting these things and I'm not interested. And he said, how do you know you're not interested? Do you have any idea what a dean does? And I said, oh, not really. And he said, well, you might want to find out, And that was so similar to the kind of advice that I give my students. I mean, it was shockingly similar. And so I thought, okay, so maybe I'll, so I had a couple of conversations and I realized that there are many different kinds of deanships. And some of that work is actually incredibly interesting. And so when the position at Princeton opened up, I thought, I could put my toe in the water here. If I really don't like it, it doesn't require a major change in my life. And I discovered I liked many things about it. I can't say I loved everything about it, but I liked many things about it. And I liked being able to reimagine the way the faculty worked with the dean's office as in partnership. I liked the fact that faculty could come to the dean's office with ideas and we would do everything we could to help make that happen. I liked helping people have greater visibility into the administrative practices and processes of the university. And so what I saw happening is that more and more faculty were saying, this looks like a really interesting job. I might want to do this myself. So I'm actually seeing that more and more people are finding these administrative roles kind of intriguing, as opposed to asking, why are you doing this? Right, and so that surprised me. And then, frankly, even after I became president, I've actually had a number of colleagues, a larger number of colleagues than I would have expected, say, I want to talk to you about how you made this move. Because I always thought that people who did those jobs were them, and we were us. And now I'm thinking maybe there's a smaller gap between us and them than I thought.
Okay, so when those colleagues, I'll take the bait. So when those colleagues, come in and say, I want to know how you made this move, you tell them what? The secret thing is partly curiosity. I mean, I feel that one of the things that compels so many of us who find ourselves in the academy is a kind of curiosity, right? A curiosity about ideas and people and cultures and a willingness to take intellectual risks. And I saw in Swarthmore
an institution whose values I believed in, with traditions I admired, with faculty colleagues who managed beautifully, for the most part, that balance between being dedicated teachers and productive, influential scholars, an extraordinary body of alums. And I just thought, this is going to sound a little hokey, but I just felt that this was an amazing opportunity at this point in my life to try something new, something where I would learn something new every day. And I didn't want to step away from this possibility because I was afraid to do it. And that's kind of what I thought. And I also thought that since Swarthmore is an institution that values the life of the mind so profoundly, I was convinced that I could do this job and still be an intellectual. Right? I didn't feel like I had to turn off my brain to do this. And so, so there are, am I learning things? Every minute. The idea that rarely am I in a meeting that has anything to do with what I've just been doing or what I'm about to do. So it's constant whiplash, right? And I just feel as if I'm discovering both strengths and weaknesses that I did not know I had, but they're extraordinary opportunities for growth. And I want to believe, and I'm doing this because I do believe that the work that my colleagues and I can do in this role and at this moment can make a difference in the lives of our students, can make a difference in the lives of the larger world, and I think that our students and faculty have the opportunity to have an exponential impact on the world beyond themselves. So it seems to me important work. Does that answer the question or not?
Well, we can keep going.
Okay.
I think the phrase that you said that I'm stuck on is I wanted to not do it because I was afraid of what might happen. You said it more eloquently than I did, than I'm saying it now. And look, the truth of the matter is that the thing that has got to be, that is amazing, and you've got to know it's amazing for people looking at you and experiencing you, is that you're not simply the 15th president of Swarthmore College. You are an African-American woman who is the 15th president of Swarthmore College. So the question for me is that you're, every moment, it's not simply that you're going to a bunch of meetings and you have a lot of responsibilities and getting up early and you have to be quick on your feet, but you're doing it in locations in which a person who looks like you and who has the background that you have maybe hasn't been so present. And I wonder whether or not you're considering that during your days, or whether or not that's something that maybe one needs to not think about so much in order to get through the course of the day. I wish I could say that more eloquently.
No, it was perfectly eloquent. It's always both and. So that doesn't surprise you. There are, but I am rarely not aware of the fact that I'm a black woman in these spaces, but that is often enormously empowering for me, right? So do you know what I'm saying? So it does
No.
not. No, you do not. Okay, all right. No, okay, say more. He says. Okay. Let me think. Okay, so let me think of a couple of examples. The first time I was on campus after my appointment was announced. So because Princeton and Swarthmore are about an hour apart, I would go, every few weeks for meetings in that transitional semester. So the first time I did that, I had parked and I was walking and I was approaching the main administrative building. And a couple of women who were from the night shift of what we call EVS techs, environmental services techs, were coming out of the building. And I said, "Morning, how are you?" And they said, "Aren't you the new president?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, one of them said, "I've worked here for, 30 years, another one 35 years. She said, "No president has ever spoken to me." Okay? So and it would never have occurred to me not,
Wow.
so we just hugged each other, right? And I'm like fighting back tears, right? But I'm thinking to myself, this is why I am supposed to be here, right? And so I love the fact that the EVS techs and, and the gardeners and landscapers feel that I am their president too. And they will say to me, there are times when there's a lot going on that I would rather not be going on campus, and they will say, President Val, we're praying for you, okay? And I mean, and I know that, in, Little Rock AME Zion Church in Chester, they are praying for me, and that is just fine with me, okay? So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I mean. I feel that I can't be in this job and not bring my full. So this is, something that Ruth Simmons told me when I was about to accept the Swarthmore offer. She said something like, "You don't ever be afraid to let your full humanity show." So that's kind of what I mean when I say that I never. It's not that I ever think I'm not a Black woman in these spaces, but that for me can be really empowering in a whole range of ways. And I don't mean, in some sort of, that I'm intoxicated with a sense of nobility or something. I mean, it can give me a deep sense of irony and, and humor, and I think it makes it easier for folks to, I want it to make it easier for folks to be able to enter into some of these difficult conversations that we have to have, right? And I feel as if the fact that I have some background in talking about race and talking about intersectionality and talking about whiteness when we are dealing with these issues on the ground, I feel that I have I have something some reservoir to draw on, and that's valuable to me.
I read an interview with you, and I think that the way that you say it is that the president has to stand as the symbolic and emotional center for the college. I wonder what you mean by that, and I wonder what symbol you think that you're bringing, and what change in that symbolism you're thinking of bringing. That's question one. And then question two is, you've got to do all that, when do you rest and go to the gym and go on vacation, things like that?
July. Okay. So the first question was about being the emotional center.
These are your words, the
right,
symbolic
yes.
and an emotional center.
So I was actually hoping, I would have loved to have had Carol's take on that, because I wonder how much of this is a function of being at a small liberal arts college, and how much of it comes with the territory. But I think in the small liberal arts context, that is an important dimension of the presidency and something that I wasn't fully expecting. And what do I mean by that? First, certainly whenever a crisis or tragedy hits one's campus, the college needs to hear some sort of word of reassurance and compassion from me, from the president. That's not surprising. What surprised me was to see that when crises hit the national scene, tragedies hit the global context, I'll just say it, when we get troublesome announcements from the current presidential administration, then the campus and the broader community, I realize, wants to hear something from me. They want to hear it framed. They want to see how the college values help us move together as a community through these difficult moments. And that's something that I think I wasn't expecting. So I think, so that's part of it. Also, I also think when I look back at the history of Swarthmore and some other small colleges with which I'm familiar, the historical memory of the institution often defines the eras by the values and priorities and temperaments of the person who was leading the institution at that time. And it has become increasingly clear to me that it's important for me to be explicit about the values and expectations and assumptions that I'm bringing to the college, because I think they can help frame our progress through this period as well. So I guess I think those are some of the ways in which that's meaningful to me. And then, one other point that I think is related, but I'm not exactly certain how, is that I realize that certainly for students, they often they experience a disjuncture between the president as a role and Valerie Smith as a person. And that can get confusing. And sometimes if they want to talk to me about something or want to share concerns with me, I think they want a substantive answer to the issue they're raising. And sometimes what they want is some sort of connection to know that I have heard them. And that feels more like an emotional connection than an intellectual one. And part of the challenge, one challenge of the job is knowing how to move between and among those registers. So, yeah. So
Thank you. And the sleeping.
The sleeping part. Okay, so.
Just to say it in more seriously, there are, everyone in this room is overworked.
That's right.
And everyone in this room has struggled to get here. And I think that part of what stops people from competing or moving to levels that they can achieve, and in all types of ways, is in fact work-life balance.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So put on your oxygen mask first, right? That has got to be the mantra. I feel, I talked about why I moved to UCLA. One of the things that living in Los Angeles taught me was the importance of self-care. And it taught me early on that self-care did not contradict the idea of excellence and intellectual engagement and rigor. And in fact, for me, I learned that they actually feed each other. And so I've been very explicit at the college from the beginning that if I have to do a lot of entertaining, the food has to be clean and nutritious and healthful. And so and delicious, right? And so that's been sort of wonderful for college catering to sort of rise to that challenge. And so part of my goal is to figure out how we can spread that more fully through the whole sort of dining services area. That's one thing. Secondly, I cannot sit in my office and have meeting after meeting after meeting without going numb. I actually prefer to have walking meetings with people, and they know that. And so it's like, let's go walk the president. So we can sort of go, but so I'm just trying to figure out ways of getting that in. If I have to go to the gym, do weight training and so on, I have to do it 6 o'clock in the morning. That's how, I would like to be able to get more sleep, but I got to do that. But on the other hand, if I get up that early.
You're getting up at 5 so you can get to the gym at 6?
Yeah.
No one in this room is happy with you right now.
Okay, but, but look, here's the thing. If I don't do that, I'm going to kill myself.
Right.
I mean that in more than one way. So what I'm saying is I've got to take care of myself, right? And so I actually, and I do that because it works for me. The important thing is for everybody to figure out what it is that works for them, right? In my next life, what I'm not able to do as much as I would like is sustain my yoga practice. That's enormously important to me. But I actually need to be able to figure out time to do that, and I'm not consistent with it. Sleep is really important, and I'm not as great about getting as much sleep as I should, but I'm trying to be better about it. I don't like the fact that I can run on too little sleep, and so I'm trying to get better at that.
I just wanted to ask you a few questions about the sort of nitty-gritty of your actual job. I know that you're in the middle of an impressive capital campaign. I think that the plan is to, not in the middle, I think you're at the beginning of it. The plan is to raise $450 million. How do you do that?
So,
And get really explicit.
okay, get really explicit? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to get really explicit, and then I'll sort of go a little more general. The first thing you do is you announce in a quiet phase, right? So you don't, when you actually launch, we launched our campaign about a year ago. We had already raised a couple of $100 million by when we announced. So that's typically how you do it, so that when you announce, you've got some momentum already behind you. But your development or advancement staff or vice president or director actually needs to hire a whole team of extra people to manage the additional outreach and follow-up, to manage your conversations with foundations. There's just so much additional labor that goes into a campaign, so they end up hiring lots more people. Research is incredibly important because you've got to know who is in your donor base. You need to know what their capacity is, what their interests are. You've got plenty of people who have a history of giving, but many more people who don't. And a big part of this is having good research to know who you need to meet. You've got to work your network of contacts. You know, who do you know? Who does some board member know? Who does an alum from the class of 70 know that they can help with? The other thing, I mean, one wonderful thing about a campaign is that it's an opportunity for all the different constituencies of the institution to think together about the core values of the institution, the aspirations of the institution, and to draw together in support of that. So I think that there's some important internal work on the part of the institution that needs to take place as part of the groundwork of a campaign. And then a big part of the fundraising itself is articulating that mission to your donors and potential donors and helping them find a place for themselves in that mission, a place where they feel they can make an impact, a place where their own values align with the values of the institution, where they feel that they matter. And so fundamentally, when I pull back from those mechanics, the thing that I think is most important, and this has been one of the greatest lessons for me, is that I think fundraising is all about building relationships.
Right.
And that is why I think it is such a pleasure to do that. You also, and the other thing that I think is really valuable is to be able to appreciate the fact that fundraising can be a joy and a gift to the giver. Right? So I think if you approach it thinking that, you know, I'm about to ask you to pick up this heavy burden and I know it's a drag, but somebody has to do it, you know, it's hard to get excited. But if you enter those conversations genuinely believing that this is an opportunity for I think that can become contagious, and that's part of what makes it fun work.
If I can just move on, I know that one of your passions is around diversity and diversifying the student body and also diversifying the faculty. I wanted to actually just focus a little bit on the diversification of the faculty, because my understanding is that we're doing a better job in this country of changing the face of the student body, particularly at elite institutions. But I don't know that we're doing such a great job with the faculty.
Right.
The statistics I've seen is that African American people at the rate of diversification that's happening now won't reach parity for another 100 years in the country.
Yeah.
So how are you thinking about how to address that in terms of the, not simply for Swarthmore, but how should one be thinking about changing the mix of the faculty, actually having it be more representative of this country and the world?
Right. I mean, I think that that pipelines are key. And I think that it is enormously important to not only be helping by working to build that pipeline with students who are in college, but I think even to help people who are in, you know, young people who are in high school begin to visualize what life in the academy might be as they are thinking about their career options and possibilities. You know, we have a number of programs that I think, have been successful in helping to diversify the academy already. The Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship program is one powerful example. I think it's had a tremendous impact, but it works with small numbers of students on individual campuses. I think if we had other kinds of pipeline programs like that that addressed a broader range of fields, I think that could be helpful. So I think that those sort of formal pipelines are valuable. But I actually also know of any number of folks who decided to become academics because a faculty member took it upon him or herself to say, you know, have you ever thought about getting a PhD? And often those folks would say, I absolutely never thought about it. Well, let's talk about what that involves and what the life of an academic would look like. And that has made an enormous difference. Often it's faculty of color who do that, but it has to be the responsibility of everyone I think everyone who's in the academy who cares about the diversification of future generations of academics. But I do think that kind of pipeline work, mentorship work, and helping to make the work that we do visible, and pulling the cover off. How did we get here? What do our days look like? How do we pick research topics? What does failure feel like? I mean, I think these are all important questions that I think can help move the needle over time. But I do think our institutions need to make the diversification of the faculty an important and valuable metric as we evaluate ourselves. So how much do you publish? What are your teaching evaluations like? What's your international visibility? All that's great, but also what are we as departments, what are we as faculty doing to diversify the field? What do our searches look like? What are our how are we training faculty to be aware of their unconscious biases and search processes? I mean, I think all of that is really important work.
You know, I'll just share with you something that I said to you before, that in olden times, I actually taught at Swarthmore as part of something called the Consortium for a Strong Minority Presence at Liberal Arts Colleges. An unfortunate name in retrospect, but one that in fact has had a great deal towards leading me, allowed me to finish my degree and become a university professor. So I have a special connection to Swarthmore, a special place in my heart with it.
I think that's another place where those interventions are important.
Right. Exactly. Those sort of break points where you see a lot of people running out of money or having difficulty just getting through the ends of the process.
Right.
I certainly know that that's a massive issue here for us, and something that we have to be careful with the students once they're out of classes and are beyond the prospectus and all of that.
Right.
I want to ask you about some sticky matters a little bit, and then I promise that we will soon end and give our beautiful audience the chance to demonstrate their beauty. I just wanted to ask you to talk in some sophisticated yet concise way about the problems now, not so around the deferred action for childhood arrivals situation. What are you thinking about it in terms of the ways in which it's impacting colleges and universities in the United States?
Right. Well, I mean, I believe that as institutions of higher education, we have a duty and a responsibility to educate any student that we believe is qualified to be at our institution, regardless of their demographic circumstances, their citizenship, and so on. And to whatever extent possible, I think we owe it to them to provide the support that they need to be able to be protected from government intervention and interference and so on. So I realize certain institutions are perhaps better positioned to do that than others. And I'm fortunate to be an institution that is reasonably well positioned to be able to not only admit students, but also to be able to support them financially. But I think that if I want to pull back from my institution, what I think is most important here is that we try to think about this as a sector and not just as individual institutions, that we lobby elected officials, that we exchange best practices, and that we also think about, you mentioned the term breakpoints. what should we be doing at a micro level to support these students in terms of financial aid? What are they prevented, what does their citizenship status prevent them from being able to
Right.
do that undermines their experience as students? And what practices should we be developing to protect them from those kinds of inequities, and how can we work together as a sector to support those students? So I basically feel, I feel like we have a duty of care to the young people who have been entrusted to us. And I think we've got to work individually, collectively, to support those students and to push back against these egregious policy changes that are having such a profound impact on them.
Right, and I'll follow that up by asking you to talk a little bit about the #MeToo movement and the ways that is impacting college life in this country. Absolutely.
I think this is one of the most complex and challenging issues that we are facing in higher ed, especially, but I realize but certainly not exclusively in the residential liberal arts sector. And so I think one of the opportunities that I think that we have in higher ed, specifically has to do with the education piece, right? And so certainly we need to work on our adjudication and investigation, but I think we have an important role to play in terms of educating students about, and frankly all members of our community, about what constitutes sexual misconduct, harassment, and assault, what the responsibilities are when somebody reports to a member of the community. But I think, we also have a responsibility to teach about allyship, what it means to be an ally, what it means to support a student who finds themselves in a situation that has the potential to become dangerous. I think we have responsibility to educate members of our community about what healthy relationships are and look like, to provide opportunities for them to be able to speak frankly and openly about their sexuality. So that they feel equipped to deal with some of the confusing circumstances in which they find themselves and that create consequences that none of us, sort of really want to see. So I think there's an enormous role that we can play as educators within and beyond the classroom.
Right.
And I think that will help, I hope that will help make our environments safer, because that is, of course, the major concern, is when our institutions are not safe for people who live and study and work there, we have a serious problem. And some of our, I feel as if, our students have been really powerful advocates for this kind of approach. I think what I've been hearing loud and clear from them is that focusing on punitive measures is not sufficient. We really have to think about power dynamics, where they're located, how they're played out, and how justice can be transformative, and what the educational and training models need to be in order to help create those healthier environments.
On that note, I'll say that I promised you that we wouldn't talk for more than 35 minutes. I lied about that. But I think that we'll change little things a little bit. If I can just ask you one other question. And that is, you're standing in front of us. You look fantastic. And you're an unbelievably accomplished person. Is there something that you want to say to, is there something that you would have said to that young woman from the hardscrabble streets of Williamsburg about what it takes to move forward on a journey that's both exciting and that is also about living life well and living life ethically? And I think they want to know too.
Okay. So I think that I would have said, I would have told myself to try not to worry about things over which I have no control, right? I think I spent way too much time worrying about the what ifs. I think I've gotten better about that as I've gotten older, thank goodness. But every once in a while, I find myself still staying up at night thinking about those kinds of questions. But at the end of the day, I mean, I feel an enormous sense of gratitude for the opportunities I've had and for the life I've led as an academic and as an administrator. And so I would have told her to try to be present in the moment and not worry so much about things over which I have no control and let the future take care of itself.
On that note, I think that we can take questions. If you guys are interested in asking questions, we'll do it from those microphones on either side of the aisle.
And you'll ask people to
we'll
identify themselves?
My handlers have told me to please ask people to be succinct with your questions. We'll let the people who are going to leave, we'll let ourselves settle a little bit. Please.
Oh, thank you very much. I wanted to ask about race, property, what's your vision for the university's responsibility to the community at large, in particular as it impacts gentrification? I'm thinking about like Temple University, UPenn, Drexel, Columbia.
That's a great question. So I think universities have a tremendous opportunity to provide resources and opportunities to the surrounding communities. But we also recognize that those relationships have a history of being exploitative and that they often have a history of displacing or disempowering people who have a historic claim on those communities. So I would hope that the future of those relationships would look different from the past. In my ideal relationship, institutions would enter into partnerships that are more balanced and equitable with the surrounding communities, not telling their neighbors what they need, but rather being in a multi-directional conversation with them where they hear what our neighbors think they need and try to figure out how together they can get them, and how the future can be a shared enterprise rather than one that's dominating and displacing, right? So I think that I mean, in a nutshell, that's what I believe it ought to be. That relationship ought to look like. And I think, it seems to me it also needs to be multifaceted because the challenges are multifaceted. But I think, that there has to be an economic engine that provides opportunities to folks with a variety of different skill sets and at different points in the life cycle. I think that there need to be a variety of different kinds of educational opportunities. I think that there are often environmental challenges, food challenges that need to be addressed in partnerships. So I just think there are a host of complex conversations that need to take place. And I think this is another area where interdisciplinarity can be enormously valuable, right? Because I think that those conversations need to involve people in the arts and the humanities as well as in economics and architecture and engineering and so on. So in a nutshell, I think it's a big challenge for many institutions of higher education and the communities that surround them. But I sincerely hope we are able to do better in the future than we've been doing so far.
Please.
Good evening, President Smith and Bob Adler, class of '56. There are a number of historically black colleges, and I suspect that if you had become president of one of them, it might not even have been noticed outside the circle of where it's located and among the alumni. Mm-hmm. And the attention, a lot of attention was drawn to you because Swarthmore was not exclusionary white college, but historically, as a matter of fact, think when I was there might have been in the number of single digits of African American students. You're having taken this position sort of parallel to Jackie Robinson, the first. And I wonder, and it was not very long after that it became fairly normal. There were baseball players throughout the major leagues, minor leagues that were African American. It became commonplace. Can you envision a time, maybe not in my lifetime, but perhaps in yours, when it will simply not even be noticed that a black person became a president of an institution that has not been historically black?
Well, here's one thing that's interesting, is that in the past few years, an increasing number of African Americans have been appointed presidents of historically white colleges and universities. And so it's certainly still a small number, but it is beginning to seem less and less remarkable or unusual. This seems to me, it reminds me of how I remember becoming aware of the fact that women were, in those instances, white women primarily, were being appointed presidents of historically co-educational institutions, maybe starting in, I think I became aware of it more sort of in the late 80s, early 90s. When I went to college, when I went to Bates, my idea of a college president was a middle-aged to elderly white man, probably 40, right? But I mean, when I was in college, right, that's what I thought middle-aged and elderly was. So I just wasn't, and then all of a sudden I thought, wow, there are such things as women college presidents. So I think the numbers are improving. The question will be, is this, to me, will this be a fad, right? And then will we sort of get that out of our system and then go back to business as usual? Or will it have staying power, and will we see African Americans and other people of color as heads of these kinds of institutions of lots of different stripes, right? And so it's hard to know, but I do think that I am heartened by the fact that those of us who are in these roles are talking with each other, are sort of supporting each other, and are, as I mentioned earlier, receiving lots of inquiries from people who are at earlier stages in their careers saying, I'm interested in doing that, right? So I think it's another way of beginning to build a pipeline.
Please.
First of all, good evening to everyone, and thank you both for being here. A little background on my question. So I am a Brooklyn native. I went to undergrad in California. I went to the Claremont Colleges, so another institution of small liberal arts schools. I double majored in literature and Africana studies, and I know that I want to be a professor. I know that my goal is to get my PhD and to be in academia. And part of how I funded, my undergrad, I went to private school for undergrad, part of how I funded that was I started looking at scholarships when I was in 9th grade, and I made this huge folder of all these scholarships that I had found, so by the time that I was a junior and applying to colleges, I could just sit and apply. It's all I did, all the time. And that's how I was able to fund myself. And now, having that degree kind of under my belt and knowing what my long-term goal is, and knowing, at first I took time off because I was like, you know what, I just got this degree, let me work and save and then use that money to go to school. But in this economy, that's not like attainable, that's not really something that's so doable. So, I can go back to my compiling resources, but I was wondering from you, do you have any input or ideas or just suggestions about how to fund getting a PhD? Because I know that I want to be a professor. So it goes back into like getting more of us in these spaces and more people to be a part of the faculty and all those sorts of things. So any advice there, I'd love.
Well, first of all, congratulations. I am just so, I'm sure I speak for both of us. We're both, all of us. We're
It's
just
like
so,
Africana in literature?
yeah, I know. I know, absolutely.
Really? Talk to me afterwards.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
right, that's, I think, right. You need to talk to both of us and anybody else in the room afterward because we've got ideas for you. But I think that, you know, I mean, there are, so it sounds as if
Come
you.
here.
Well, yes. But, so it sounds like you've got a list of external fellowships, but, you know,
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
I've been starting compiling some things to apply to fund it, scholarships, fellowships, all sorts of things, but just wondering if you had any other input.
But I also think, you know, this is not the case across the board, but many PhD programs in literature will actually also provide you with fellowships that will offer you. I mean, it won't be lavish, but it's enough to support yourself while you're doing your studies. So, and depending on where you apply, the levels of support can be more or less competitive. But I think it's, yeah, why don't you talk to us or some other folks afterward, and we'll get a clearer sense of what you're interested in. But I, for one, am just delighted to hear about your energy and enthusiasm and passion, and this is great.
Thank you.
Please.
Good evening. Hey. See, she didn't even know I was going to be here, and my question relates to you. So thank you so much for being here. I rushed over here from AERA, which is happening about 25 blocks. My question, respectfully, is how do we hold space for conversations about the complexity and heterogeneity of Black womanhood working in the public sphere, right? I, GC class of 2015, I am the first associate professor in the history of my department. I was dissuaded from going up in that process early. I knew that I could do it because Dr. Karen Taylor did it before me. And I actually used her paperwork and her as a precedent to say, tell me I can't do this when she did it, right? So I've just been thinking so much about, and really generally asking you about your relationship to being the first one. I'm trying to hold space for people like June Jordan, for Gloria Anzaldúa, for Barbara Christian. I'm tired for Tiffany Willoughby Herald, who writes about being Mammy no more. I'm exhausted being the first one, right? And there's a part of me that is thinking, that disbelieves in embracing Afrofuturism and Afropessimism, that being inside the academy is actually where I want to be. Be interesting. I appreciate your thoughts about being an administrator, but I think a lot of us in this room are committed to building and nurturing maroon spaces. So if we could have this conversation and like, how do we talk about Black womanhood in the public sphere and it not devolve into Black exceptionalism and reinsert grit and meritocracy and all that other stuff?
Right. No, that's a great question, or a great observation. Well, okay, so, you know, I mean, I guess I will say this. You know, I think my sense. So okay, so I guess let me try this as a response. I have, you know, I talked about the decision that I made to leave a place where I was the only one because it was sort of isolating for me. I mean, I had made it, if you will, right? But I actually really wanted to be in a very different kind of institutional space where I not only had more colleagues on the faculty, but I actually had a much more heterogeneous group of students, right? So, and that to me was enormously nurturing and valuable, right? I mean, so I had students who had found their way to the university through lots of different trajectories. And that seemed to me to help me, and I think that complicated for me my sense of who my community was. Okay, so I guess I think for me, coming into this profession at the time that I did, when the numbers of people of color in the profession were as slim as they were, and the numbers of folks of color in my home institution were as small as they were, it meant that I always had a sense of my community as being larger than other academics. I mean, and larger than my colleagues. I mean, part of it was that this network of other scholars who were around the country, but who I felt buoyed me up and who I buoyed up. But it was also the students who I felt were teaching me as I was teaching them. And it was also people outside the academy who were nurturing me and supporting me even as I hoped that I was able to do that for them. So for me, I think these spaces have always worked because I've been able to expand the idea of what constitutes community. And so I think even as I talked about, this experience of being at Swarthmore, I'm not just the president for the students and the alums, but I'm president for everyone. And part of what my relationship, you asked about the relationship between our institutions and the surrounding communities. I mean, being in a small college, in a small town near Chester, where sort of Chester, PA, where people know who I feel like people have a right to have a claim on me and a claim on the institution to figure out that's what I'm looking for. I mean, I realize I've been the beneficiary of gifts and possibilities and blessings that have nothing to do with who I am, and the only thing I can do is try to figure out how to pay that forward and expand that reach. And that's the way I was raised, and that's the way I have lived my life through this profession. And so I cannot deny that there is a certain kind of exceptionalism to my career, but that's not what gets me up in the morning, and I have never drunk that Kool-Aid. So do you know what I'm saying? I mean, does that make sense? Right. That's just kind of how I would start that conversation. But another thing as I said, that I loved about being at UCLA was, as I said, the fact that I would have students in my classes who, as I said, had lots of different trajectories to getting there. I felt like my job was to say, my job is to help you get to where you want to get, and that's why you're here. And so I love the idea of helping to produce the next generation of academics, but if that's not what you want to do, let's figure out how you can use this liberal arts degree, this English major, this humanities degree to enrich the life that you want to have for yourself. And how can I and how can my colleagues and I, as a network, as a family, in a way, help get you to the next stage. So I do experience this as a communal enterprise.
And I think we have two more questions here and here.
Hello, my name is Crystal. I was a student at Bryn Mawr College when they announced your presidency, and I remember sharing so much excitement with other Black women on campus because we were just going through it at the time. But yeah, so my question is, I was wondering how and where you find spaces to enact your personal politic through your work, whether it be around intersectionality, Blackness, representation, but where do you find those spaces and how do you find yourself able to, integrate your politic?
Lots of different places, I think. I think when I find myself in the middle of sort of sticky, difficult campus conversations, I am aware of the fact that my analyses of what's going on may be a little different from some of the other folks around me because I'm bringing that background to the table. I'm not sure it's always helpful in getting us to a prompt, clean, quick answer, but I do think that background and that training keeps me aware of the contradictions and some of the ways, some of the elements that might be getting in the way of our ability to find, first of all, to identify what a just solution ought to look like, and then secondly, how to get there. So I think that's one thing. I think it is certainly evident in my approach to hiring and searches, both at the administrative level and at the faculty level. You know, I am clear that I need to hold myself and the institution accountable to our desires to become an increasingly diverse and increasingly inclusive community. So I think that that's really important as well. Also, as I think about, I mean, the college has aspirations to have a just relationship with our surrounding communities, and I think that I have been encouraging deeper and more nuanced and focused conversations about what that ought to look like and how we assess and evaluate the success of those enterprises. And also holding us as an institution accountable to being more collaborative with each other and with our neighbors. So I think that's another area where that comes in. And then, in a completely different register, in my speeches and messages to the community, I try as much as I can to bring either explicitly or implicitly references to the archive of writers who have been important to me or who I'm discovering, or to bring in my sort of critical and analytical sensibility. So if I quote something, I kind of use it as an occasion to take it apart and kind of talk about it from the perspective of a literary critic. And Swarthmore people recognize that I'm doing that, and my colleagues in the English department will thank me for it. But so I feel like I do that in lots of different ways. And then I also try to nourish my spirit by trying to read as much as I can, going to theater as much as I can, to try to make sure that I don't lose touch with the culture, arts person who lives inside me.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I wanted to say first I came here tonight because as a Black woman working in higher ed, when I saw this event being billed as an event for Black women, I knew I needed to come here and get some nourishment from Black women in education. So whoever put this together, thank you. And I think a lot of what I want to ask you has been touched on, but working in this area is very challenging. And my job is, bringing diversity to the campus, and I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, and it's not happening. And it's frustrating because when you look at academia in particular, if there's any profession that will bill itself as liberal, progressive, inclusive, it's faculty. And while, as someone said earlier, you may get, and I'll just be frank, Black students, but there's definitely pushback on getting Black faculty, Black administrators, and when you talk about a pipeline, we have a pipeline because I think we all hear repeatedly that Black women are the most educated gender, in the society. So when we talk about the pipeline, we're here. So why can't we get those positions? And I applaud that you're in a position because I know it has to come from the top down. That's not what I see. I see a lot of talk about diversity, but when it comes to bringing on non-white faculty, non-white administrators, there is different dialogue. So you are in the position to make that happen. But for those of us who are not, how do we raise our voice in a way that has to be heard to say that we're not buying your lip service anymore. We need you to put some action behind it. How do we do that and still be safe within the place? Because I think I'm not afraid at all, but most people are. And I'm in a position where people come and complain to me. And I'm like, but you have tenure. Stand up in a meeting and say what you're feeling, and for whatever reason, people feel stifled. So how would you advise somebody like me or, you know, faculty here who I'm sure have the same experience to create that dialogue or that place? Hold people accountable. You know, I'm drinking your Kool-Aid and I'm serving it back to you.
Yes.
And that's what I try to do. Do it in a way, because if you tell people like, I heard you, and now I'm looking for you to do what I heard you say. You know, how do you do that without, and maintain it? You know, I said, how do you maintain your job and your identity?
Right, right.
So I just want to say before you answer that question, that probably, I'm going to have to cut it off because we're going to try to end at 8. So I do apologize for that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. I think that's a really tough question. I think that, and I guess I feel without knowing the circumstances, it's hard to comment in terms of what has already been tried. But I have definitely seen this phenomenon of people who one thinks would have power to be able to stand up, be unwilling to do that. And so it makes me wonder a little bit about the possibility of working, to what extent you have found that working in coalitions that, you know, sort of bring faculty and administrators together has helped. I mean, in other words, whether or not allies in this around this particular issue have spoken collectively to administration about the importance, or to try to look at a more micro level at the processes where the breakdowns are. I mean, is there, are people in the pool but they're not being interviewed? Is something, I mean, are there external trainings that need to happen? As I said, I mean, you know, there's this whole issue of unconscious bias. Maybe there needs to, I mean, you probably have already tried this, you're nodding your head, but I guess I said it before, I'm not sure I feel that I can respond without knowing a bit more about what you've already tried. So maybe we can talk for a few minutes afterward. Okay. But thank you for that question.
I just want to end with saying, wow, that was really quite amazing. Thank you so much. We hope that you will be often at the Graduate Center as one of our sisters. So nice to have you here. Oh.